向右转。行驶600米后，向左转。向左转，然后向右转。向右转。行驶400米后，从环岛的2出口出来。
discourse, ideas that challenge students and what a university education is really for. Plus,
it's wild. I mean, the biggest, most obvious addition here is that you can now type out dialogue and it'll translate it into very realistic speech.
AI is just one of the big issues those graduating students and the rest of us will have to come to terms with. The CBC's Nora Young has been playing around with some of the latest tools coming up, how to use AI now, and why she is concerned with yet another technological filter between us humans. We begin with the price of getting sick, the high cost of the hospital parking. Good morning, I'm Matt Galloway. This is The Road.
I haven't been working for almost a year now, just because I have to go to the hospital all the time, and there's like side effects from chemo, radiation, and like surgeries, all of that. And I think paying so much money for parking, I think it's a little outrageous.
Being in a hospital is a stressful experience for all sorts of reasons. That's a cancer patient at one of the big hospitals in downtown Toronto, speaking with our intern, Isabella Polisi. Whether you're a patient or a family member, those outrageous parking costs that the patient is talking about can really add up. Another woman, named Nicole, has a young child with kidney issues and spends a lot of time at the hospital and a lot of money.
He's admitted very often to hospital, and the amount of money does add up. It's hard for most of us to go back to work because he has a lot of high maintenance medical attention required. Credit card bills keep going up, and $20 is quite a bit, like on a day-to-day thing. And with him, we don't know like when we're gonna leave, so it's kind of unexpected.
Rupert Verstocki visits his wife in the hospital daily, says parking fees are a problem without an easy solution. He estimates that he has spent more than $3,000 on parking since his wife went into hospital last year.
My wife has been in hospital for 8 months, which is unfortunate in its own right. But regarding the parking, even with the discounted rate of $14 a day, do the math over 8 months. It's very, very expensive. So prices can be a real burden on families. But I don't know the solution for it. That's the problem. The hospitals say they use the parking fees to put into other programs because they're not getting funded enough. So it's a catch-22 because you want the services and facilities to be as high-end as possible. But if they're not getting funding, the funding has to come from somewhere.
The cost of hospital parking has been a hot-button issue for years across this country. Last month, Nova Scotia eliminated parking fees at hospitals and healthcare facilities. But earlier in June, a private member's bill to do something similar in Ontario was actually voted down. Marie Gergich supported that bill. She is in treatment for stage 3 lobular breast cancer, and she is with me in studio. Marie, good morning.
Good morning.
How are you doing?
I'm wonderful.
That's
How
good.
are you?
I'm great, thanks. I just wanted to make sure, given what I mentioned in terms of care that you're getting right now, how you're feeling. When you started going in for treatment, tell me a little bit about what this meant for you and how often you needed to go to the hospital.
So I was actually diagnosed in November 2022, which was initially believed to be stage 2. It was then updated to stage 3 lobular breast cancer. So for me, that meant undergoing a mastectomy, chemo, radiation, lymph node dissection, and preventative hysterectomy. So over the past 2.5 years, I would say it just has now tailed off. But I was spending, during chemo and radiation, it's a daily visit. On top of that, you're doing bone scans, you're visiting your oncologist and the surgeon. There's many appointments aside from just treatment that are, part of that care.
You've been through a lot, and that's a lot of going to the hospital, a lot of figuring out where you're going to park when you get to the hospital.
Oh my goodness, yes.
So how do those parking costs add up?
Oh, I would say in the thick of it, you could be looking at anywhere between $400 to $500 a month. And that's between 2 hospitals. So that's something to keep in mind as well. Depending on where the patient is, it could be treatment in 2 to 3 facilities. So I was going to Markham Stouffville or chemo and then radiation elsewhere. And then depending where your doctors are, that might be balls, and it depends where, you know, you are in life. So for my husband and I, that meant going into lines of credit. You accumulate debt. There's a lot of other costs that aren't really considered with cancer. For my husband and I, trying to put 3 kids through university at the time.
This is, I mean, you've said the cost of cancer is parking, it's the care, it's the hospital visits, it's the hospital beds, it's the medication. Given all of that, and just in talking about the parking issue,
Yes.
as I mentioned, you're in Ontario. The province of
Yes.
Ontario is looking at this in terms of eliminating parking fees like Nova Scotia did at some of its healthcare facilities. When this bill was voted down, what went through your mind?
To be honest, I felt even more determined to keep going and to keep sharing my story, because I think it's important that cancer patients, and all patients to be honest, should not have to be carrying that burden. Now, I don't believe the hospital should either, but I think there are options that we can perhaps consider, you know, whether it's a token, whether it's validating, because I know one of the major issues that was brought up was that people were taking advantage of that free parking, so people that were not even attending the hospital. But I think that at the end of the day, when you're going through a cancer treatment and you're worrying about putting food on the table, and you're worrying about, you know, to keep in mind, if you're privileged enough to have private health care, you're still not 100% covered. We think as Canadians it's free health care, and it is not. It does come at a cost. And so, for example, you know, you're paying parking, and some people have to decide, do I put a meal on the table or do I go to chemo today?
That's an incredible choice to have to make.
Isn't it?
Do you know what I mean? We asked the Ontario Hospital Association about these parking fees, and they sent us a statement that reads in part, in cases where parking costs may pose a significant concern, Ontario's hospitals have policies in place and work with those individuals to find a solution. It goes on to say that parking revenue is an investment in supporting patient care, and that these fees give hospitals financial and operational stability and allow them to invest in things like medical and diagnostic equipment. What do you make of that? That the hospitals need the money that patients have to pay and their families have to pay when they are there at the hospital to pay for the care that we get?
Listen, I believe that the hospital needs the money to care. Absolutely, that's not a question. But I do not believe that it should be the patients that pay it.
Can I just, before I let you go, just go back to something that you said earlier, which is that idea that what you don't want is a patient that has to choose between going for chemo and putting food on the table because money is tight. What would you say, if you were able to talk to the Premier of Ontario, what would you say about that dilemma?
I would ask them how they would feel if that was their mother or their daughter going through care and having to decide, do I adhere to a medication that has the potential to stop reoccurrence, or do I not attend chemo today because I'm worried that hydro's going to come cut off my electricity because I'm now behind, because I'm not making what I was making. Now I'm dealing with all of these added expenses. You know, for example, my prosthetic was actually subsidized, and it's a custom breast form that goes at the base cost of $5,000. So I would ask the Premier, if this was his daughter or his mother, would he not want that to be not even an option? Like, that's the care.
I'm glad to have you here. Thank you for coming in, and I wish you the very best of health.
Yes, thanks so much for having me.
Marie Gergich is an advocate for free parking in hospitals and is in treatment for stage 3 lobular breast cancer. As I mentioned, while patients in Ontario and many other provinces are still paying for hospital parking, it's been free in Nova Scotia since the 1st of May. British Columbia brought in free parking at hospitals in 2020, near the start of the pandemic, only to partially abandon that practice years later, 2 years later actually. Andre Picard is a health columnist for the Globe and Mail. He has been covering this issue for years. Andre, good morning.
Good morning.
I say for years because you have written about this, and I know that the response, you get a response for anything that you write, but the response from your readers for this issue was particularly strong. What have you heard from readers on this?
Yeah, this issue comes up, it raises its head every few years for decades, and this one that really rankles readers. You know, it feels when you go to pay for parking, say you're getting cancer treatment like Marie, it really is like adding insult to injury. So it hurts people. They feel it every single day, and it bothers them. And then we get these CBC, right around the time the pandemic started, by coincidence, they brought in free parking. It worked well for a couple of years, and then people started going back to work. And the problem is people who are not at the hospital use the parking. So it's used by non-patients, non-staff. So the condition, it actually became worse afterwards to get parking because all the parking spots were stolen, if you will, in quotes. So then they realized, well, we have to do something differently. And now it's very selective. So cancer patients, dialysis patients get free parking. People whose kids are in a children's hospital overnight, free parking. And every province has different approaches to this. In Quebec, for example, it's 2 hours free parking, then it's capped. Nova Scotia, as you mentioned, brought in free parking, but then they had the same problem. Their lots are overflowing, so they're looking for ways to bring in validation, confirmation systems. So there's all kinds of ways of doing this, but just saying parking is free, that doesn't seem to work.
In Ontario, I mean, we talked about that Ontario bill that failed. Ontario tried to find a solution before, and it didn't go anywhere. Is that right?
Yeah, about a decade ago, they brought in essentially limits on parking, so they capped the amount that you pay daily. They brought in low-cost monthly passes for people. You heard Marie mention that. Those still exist. If you know you're going to visit a hospital a lot, you can get a cheap pass, like staff. So there's different initiatives. Ontario had them a decade ago, and then every province comes up with this debate at some point.
So let me sneak in one more voice into our conversation. Michael Ruckers is a public health physician, professor at the University of Toronto's Dalhousie Lana School of Public Health. Has been listening to our conversations. Good morning to you.
Good morning.
Nice to see you. What sort of money are hospitals making through these fees?
As near as one can tell, it looks like it's something like 800 million plus minus across the country. Looks like it's maybe something like 0.5% to 1%, that area of overall hospital funding in this country. So it's a small portion of hospital funding, but $800 million is a lot of money.
And so how did this come to pass that the hospitals would rely on parking fees to some degree to help pay for the operation of their institutions and the care that we give?
It generally got kick-started sometime late 70s, early 80s, when certainly in Ontario we had health ministers who were saying things like it's time to run hospitals like a business, and hospitals were encouraged to maximize other revenue, which included food, and then they started inviting chain restaurants in to lease spaces and parking as well. So it's always been this initiative of let's get some other money in the healthcare system besides our tax dollars.
So in Nova Scotia, as I mentioned, they've eliminated hospital parking, but it has not gone particularly well. There are some hospital workers who say that at times it's harder to get parking when they need it, and that they have been late for work, that they've had to park in different areas. Have a listen to Sandra Mullen, who's the president of the Nova Scotia Government and General Employees Union.
Folks could not get access to space in the parkades because, of course, they want to reserve parkade space for patients and folks who are coming in for appointments. And they were telling folks you can't park during peak times, but our members have to work during those peak times. So it's a real challenge. And then they get in there, park overnight, and they have access. But the way shifts work and having to continue working past the end of your shift, they're coming out and finding a parking ticket because they should have been out by 7 a.m. when in fact they have to work overtime for the employer.
We contacted the Nova Scotia Health Ministry. They told us that the main problem is that the province has two major hospitals in downtown Halifax where parking has always been limited. They're working to find a fix. The health minister said that the system is going through growing pains. They said we need to find that balance between reserving enough spaces so that patients and visitors can find parking, but also trying to accommodate staff as much as possible. Andre Picard, are you sympathetic with hospital staff and what they're dealing with when we say eliminate free parking, and it turns out that maybe somebody parks to go to the movie rather than go to the hospital?
Yeah, it is finding a balance. You know, I know just downtown Halifax, they've estimated at peak, they need about 6,000 spaces, and they only have about 3,500. So this is an ongoing problem. And then we have free parking. It adds to that complexity because, again, the spots get stolen, the staff have to pay more. So these are different issues, actually. Paying free parking for patients and for staff. Should we be subsidizing well-paid healthcare workers? Parking is a question. Maybe we'd be better off giving them free transit passes. And it's not always about cars. There's other issues there.
Would it be feasible, Andre, to have a system of validated parking? This is a bit of what Marie was saying. You validate or you get a token so that the splash actually go to people who need them?
Yeah, I think that's the answer, and we know it can be done. It's done very well in Quebec. It's done in BC. The validation systems work well. What you don't want is the validation having to be done by the nurses, adding to the burden of staff. So you have to make sure you have dedicated support staff. And, honestly, we don't do that very well in Canadian healthcare. We put a lot of burden on health professionals to do this administrative task, and that's the last thing they need, is to be stamping the parking of people.
What about this idea, Andre, that these hospitals, and Michael said the percentage is low, but it's still, $800 million, that the hospitals need this money, that in a healthcare system that is stretched at or beyond its limit already, that any money is good money and necessary money, and that the money that we pay ends up coming back to us in some form of care.
Yeah, they do need that money, and that's valuable real estate that's being used for parking in downtown Toronto. It should have a payback. I think it also should lead us to think about a larger issue. We think in Canadian healthcare that everything's covered. Take a big hospital. The largest hospital in Canada is UHN. They have a budget of about $3 billion. They only get $2 billion from the province. They have so-called ancillary services, which include parking, renting clinics, having fast food. They have all kinds of other things where they raise money. Parking is actually the least of it. $600 million a year is brought in income from one hospital from doing other stuff. So we have to remember the hospitals are big businesses, and just part of their funding comes from the state.
Michael Rackless, there are a lot of people who don't have cars at all, and it's not to suggest that those who are driving are somehow at fault here, but for people who don't have a car, how do you take that into account in this discussion? What do we need to think about there so that those folks who are going to hospital or who are visiting people in hospital also aren't taking a hit in the wallet?
I think that for me it goes back to, are you patient-centered? So
we use that phrase all the time.
Well, and unfortunately, it sort of came in like 25 years ago, along with other sort of the quality initiatives, and we've really forgot about it a lot. But when somebody is being set up for long-term outpatient cancer care, let's say, or they're being admitted to hospital and they're going to be there for a while, there should be some sort of discussion about how difficult is it going to be to get here. Almost 50 years ago, when I was in practice in a community health center downtown Toronto, we had to deal with these things with patients all the time. How are you going to get here? It's going to be too hard. Maybe we'll arrange a house call. These are the kinds of things that patient-centered care would do. A quarter or more of seniors are readmitted to hospital in this country within 2 months. So you can't have somebody safe in hospital, you can't plan the discharge properly so they won't return unless you are fully engaged with the family. And part of one tactic for that strategy is talking to them about how are you going to get here every day, because we need you here every day.
So if it's not parking, if people don't have a car, you're looking at subsidizing transit, for example, for people to get to hospital?
Absolutely.
In major cities?
You do what you need to do, that like with any patient care thing, whether it's cardiac surgery, neurosurgery, whatever, you've got your basic care that you're planning, and then you tailor it. And tailoring this care means for patients that you need to ensure that they can get to the hospital and their family can get to the hospital, and part of that is transit.
You see this as part of their care. This is not a separate thing. It's not just a parking lot.
No.
This is part of the patient care.
This is not a frill. This is absolutely essential part of care.
Andre, last word to you. What is the story really about? Michael Rackless says it's not a frill, it's not about parking, it's about care. What is this story which has outraged Canadians? What is it about to you?
It's about having access to your loved ones in a hospital. This stuff is really important. You shouldn't be in care without an advocate. So this is important, but it's one of many important issues. What about daycare for people? What about public transit? What about feeding them? It is a complex issue, but it is one that really rankles people and sticks in their craw.
Andre, thank you very much.
Thanks.
Michael Rackless, thank you.
Thank you.
Andre Picard is a health columnist with the Globe and Mail. He was in Vancouver. Michael Rackless is a public health physician and professor at the University of Toronto's Dalla Lana School of Public Health. He was with me in our Toronto studio. How much have you had to pay in parking at hospitals? What has that meant for you? human sacrifices. Parking is expensive. As we said, life is expensive. What do you think the solution is here? Should we as a society be offering free parking at hospitals for patients, but also for those who are there helping to care for the patient's loved ones and family members? Well, you can let us know. Email us at thecurrent@cbc.ca. Hospital administrators also welcome to get in touch. Where does that money go, and how do you use that money? You can let us know. The CBC News is next, and then the University of Toronto's outgoing president, who will be joining us, Merrick Gertler, reflects on his role at a time when academic freedom, the role of campus protests, and the merit of a university degree are all up for debate. He's here, coming up in 6 minutes. I'm Matt Galloway, and this is The Current. Stay with us.
You're listening to CBC Radio 1. CBC, it's a Canada thing. Today on Commotion.
Kendrick Lamar just did 2 stadium shows in Toronto. His first shows in the city since winning the rap beef against Drake. But also, those shows are landing in the midst of a Canadian culture war with the United States. It raises all kinds of questions about what it means to be a hip-hop fan from Toronto.
They not like us. They not like us. They not like us. Commotion with Alamin Abdelmahmoud. This morning at 11, 11:30 in Newfoundland, and on CBC Listen, or wherever you get your podcasts. The CBC News is next. Coming up in an hour, it's Q.
Owen Wilson has played cowboy, robber, male model, and now pro golfer. Actually, ex-pro golfer with a dark past. Because as we've come to expect from Owen Wilson, nothing's as straightforward as it seems. He's going to tell you all about his new show, Stick.
From CBC News, it's The World This Hour. I'm Joe Cummings. The final day of the G7 summit in Alberta will go ahead without Donald Trump. The U.S. president left the summit early yesterday and is now back in Washington. And it has Canadian officials questioning whether Prime Minister Mark Carney was able to make any headway with Trump on a new Canada-U.S. trade agreement. Janice McGregor has more.
In front of the cameras yesterday, Trump was very complimentary about this summit. Canadian officials were speaking positively about their bilateral meetings, setting up this new 30-day deadline to reach a deal optimistically, as if it's maybe within reach. Kirsten Hillman, Canada's ambassador in Washington, who's leading these talks, remained firm yesterday that any deal must end the harm being done to Canada by Trump's tariff policy. But going by the president's comments on Air Force One last night, he has no intention of giving up that hammer, bragging about $88 billion in government revenue his tariffs have generated. Tariffs paid, must remember, by U.S. businesses and consumers. So at cold light of day here, does this 30-day deadline now look instead like potentially a countdown to when the Carney government may have to step up retaliation or risk losing face? Janice McGregor, CBC News, Banff, Alberta.
So the summit continues without the U.S. president, and on the agenda today for Prime Minister Mark Carney, along with the scheduled discussions, will be meetings on the sidelines with Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi and with Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky. Meanwhile, in Kyiv, it's Ukrainian anti-aircraft batteries firing in the midst of Russia's latest barrage. Ukrainian officials say Russia launched hundreds of drones and dozens of missiles across the country overnight, most of which were intercepted. However, at least 15 deaths are being reported. President Zelensky is saying the damage reported in Kyiv last night is the worst the capital has seen since the war began. The mother of a missing 3-year-old Quebec girl will appear in court today on charges of child abandonment. Rachel Todd's daughter, Claire Bell, was last seen at her home in LaSalle on Sunday morning. Her mother later reported her missing about 50 kilometers west of where the girl was last seen. Lauren McCallum reports.
Quebec Provincial Police will be out in force again today to search for 3-year-old Claire Bell. Yesterday, they asked the public to also be on the lookout for a brown, long-haired Chihuahua, but the child's dog was found dead along Highway 30 later that day.
Aujourd'hui, les recherches vont être ciblées.
Sûreté du Québec Sergeant Jean-Raphaël Drolet says officers will be concentrating their search today in the area where the dog was found. He says police are using helicopters, drones, and police dogs to try to find the little girl.
on a des préoccupations depuis le début.
Drolet says police are worried about the girl's well-being. She's only 3 years old and vulnerable. Claire Bell was wearing a long-sleeve shirt with pink trim and gray pants when she disappeared. They are asking people to contact police if they saw a 2007 gray Ford Escape with a baby on board sticker between LaSalle and Coteau-du-Lac on Sunday. Lauren McCallum, CBC News, Montreal.
Game 6 of the Stanley Cup Final is set for tonight in Florida, with the Panthers one win away from repeating as Stanley Cup champions. And back here in Canada, fingers are crossed.
I prefer the Oilers, of course. We need a Canadian team to win. When was the last time that happened?
Usually a Flames fan, but I made the switch for the Oilers. We want Canada to win.
The Panthers lead Edmonton in this best of 7